Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In the luxurious setting of the restaurant, the Celestial, the dim lights gently caressed the gilding, while the hushed murmurs of elegant conversation mingled with the delicate clinking of cutlery on fine china. Each table seemed like a theater, where actors dressed in silk, velvet, and gold busied themselves, playing their roles with a self-assurance mixed with arrogance. The air was charged with a certain arrogance, almost palpable, like a heady perfume that only a few knew how to appreciate. That evening, at the polished mahogany bar, a man in his 50s, dressed in a tailored charcoal gray suit, looked profoundly bored. Richard Devereux, a famous businessman and real estate magnate, was used to being the center of attention, but nothing tonight could pique his interest. His piercing, icy blue eyes scanned the room with a bored air. His gaze fell on a discreet figure moving easily among the tables, carefully carrying trays laden with refined dishes. Maya, a young black woman of 26, she had grown up in a working-class neighborhood of the city, but had, through hard work and dignity, earned a place in this temple of elegance. Her gait was fluid, almost silent, her gestures precise and graceful. Yet, despite her professionalism, certain glances, often furtive, betrayed a cold, sometimes contemptuous, judgment. Maya wasn't just another waitress. Behind her measured smile and frank eyes, she carried the story of a daily struggle against prejudice and indifference. Every night, she faced the invisible weight of a society that rarely gave her the place she deserved. As she passed the old corner piano, an imposing piece of furniture with weathered but silent wood, Richard couldn't help but smile mockingly. He saw in her a distraction, a diversion from his growing boredom. With a sweeping, almost theatrical gesture, he beckoned to Maya, his voice filled with that venomous mixture of defiance and contempt. "Play us something, if you dare." Silence fell like a leaden blanket. Conversations froze, forks dangling inches from plates, while all eyes focused on Maya, the waitress who had only ever been asked to serve. This challenge was nothing more than humiliation disguised as a spectacle. A cruel test, a dignity orchestrated by a man accustomed to believing himself all-powerful in this elite microcosm. But Richard still didn't know that this evening wouldn't play out according to his rules. That behind this discreet young woman lurked an unsuspected force, ready to shake arrogance and make this act of arrogance pay dearly. Maya, finishing her shift with the same efficiency and restraint that had always allowed her to hold her head high despite the heavy stares and silent judgments, felt her heart race. This wasn't the first time she'd faced this kind of provocation. But tonight, something had changed inside her. A flame, a new resolve. At 26, she knew the unspoken rules of this world, but she was ready to turn them upside down. That evening, as Maya, with her professional smile, had just delivered a tray of carefully presented desserts to a table of wealthy clients, she suddenly felt the weight of an insistent gaze fixed on her. This gaze, cold and penetrating, was none other than that of Richard Devereux. Sitting casually at the mahogany bar, the millionaire businessman was a well-known figure in the business world, renowned as much for his flourishing business as for his arrogance and sometimes inappropriate excesses. He watched her with a calculating smirk, like a predator assessing its prey. The look wasn't friendly. It was an invitation disguised as a challenge, a provocation to the young waitress. Richard stood slowly, attracting attention as he crossed the room with the confidence of a king in his kingdom. His impeccable suit and haughty bearing seemed to accentuate every step he took. Arriving near the old corner piano, an instrument with dark wood, whose silence betrayed its oblivion in this luxurious setting, he stopped and addressed Maya in a smug, almost contemptuous tone. "Hey, you there. Use the piano, and show us that you're worth something other than carrying trays." The conversation stopped abruptly. An awkward silence fell over the room. The customers, frozen, oscillated between surprise and amusement at this unexpected spectacle. Some exchanged incredulous glances, while others held their breath, intrigued by this scene that promised to be more than just entertainment. Maya felt a red fire rise in her cheeks, but not with anger or shame. Rather, it was a quiet determination, an inner strength forged by years of silent struggle. She was familiar with these kinds of taunts, these traps disguised as jokes. But this time, she knew she wouldn't let this attempt at humiliation break her. Slowly and gracefully, she placed the tray on a nearby table, attracting a few curious glances, then approached the piano. Her hands were barely trembling, just enough to betray the tension of the moment, but her gaze remained straight, defiant. Richard, satisfied, straightened, ready to savor what he imagined would be a ridiculous performance, a public demonstration of his superiority. Yet the moment her fingers touched the keys, Maya didn't play the music Richard had anticipated. Not a clumsy tune, not a laughable false note. What rose from the instrument was a melody full of life, passion, and emotion, a quiet but powerful statement that went far beyond the arrogant millionaire's expectations. Maya slowly sat down in front of the old corner piano, her hands gently resting on the worn wood, but her gaze remained steady, calm, filled with silent determination. Around her, the air seemed charged with electricity, a subtle mix of arrogance and expectation floating in the room. The guests, frozen, held their breath, trapped by this unexpected spectacle. Her fingers first timidly brushed the keys, as if to feel the temperature of the instrument, the texture of the touch. Then, with a sure, precise, and assured gesture, she began a melody. It was not a simple, light composition, but a deep, vibrant piece, charged with emotions that could not be ignored. Each note resonated with a rare intensity, mixing pride and pain, suppressed pride, and unshakable hope. The opening chords immediately captured the entire room's attention. The murmurs fell silent, and eyes focused on Maya, fascinated by her mastery of the piece. This piece seemed to tell a story, one of invisible struggle, silent resistance, a fight for dignity. There was a raw truth in her music, a quiet strength that commanded respect without a word. Richard frowned, visibly taken aback. What he had thought would be an opportunity to mock him had turned into a revelation. The mockery gave way to growing unease as each note shattered his arrogance, confronting him with a reality he didn't want to see. He looked away for a moment, unable to bear that proud gaze and that masterful performance. In the hall, the first murmurs of admiration began, softly, like a breath. Then, when the last chord died away with an almost painful sweetness, a suspended silence enveloped the room, as if time itself had stopped flowing. Then, slowly, almost timidly, applause began to break out, at first discreet and hesitant, before gaining strength and intensity. Soon, the entire room was vibrating to the sincere rhythm of this ovation. Richard looked down, trapped in the web he himself had woven. He had just understood that behind that humble and self-effacing appearance, behind that role of a simple waitress, hid a brilliant talent and an unshakable dignity that he could never ignore or diminish. The last note had faded, but the emotion it had aroused still hung vibrant and palpable throughout the room. Maya sat for a moment, her hands resting gently on the keyboard, as if to soak up the strength she had just unleashed. Then, slowly, she straightened, a faint smile of pride and serenity illuminating her face. This smile, discreet but powerful, seemed to say that she had won much more than a simple challenge. She resumed her place among the waiters, her steps more assured, her posture changed. A new presence emanated from her, commanding, dignified, unmistakable. The gazes that previously avoided her or appraised her condescendingly now rested upon her, with admiration and respect. Richard, still frozen in disbelief, stood awkwardly, his face struggling to regain the composure he thought he had. He approached her, clearly intent on regaining control, on reasserting his power. But this was no longer the same young woman he had tried to humiliate a few minutes earlier. Maya stared straight into his eyes, her gaze clear and unwavering like a silent challenge. She spoke in a calm, firm voice, devoid of anger, but full of conviction. "Mr. Devereux, the next time you want to have fun humiliating someone, first make sure what they are capable of." The weight of these words seemed to cause a heavy silence to fall over the room. The guests, witnesses to the scene, exchanged glances filled with a new, almost solemn admiration. A few, touched by this expression of dignity and courage, spontaneously rose to applaud again, saluting Maya's quiet strength. What could have been just another humiliation for a discreet waitress had turned into a moment of poetic justice, a lesson in humility given by a woman whose worth far exceeded appearances. Richard, stripped of his confidence, learned the hard way that respect is not commanded like an order, nor played like a game. Respect must be earned, and tonight, it was Maya who had reminded him of this brilliantly. The next morning, as the city awoke to clear skies, a digital storm raged on social media. A video discreetly captured by a restaurant customer circulated at lightning speed. Maya, focused and passionate, played the piano with rare mastery and a deep emotion that transcended every note. What could have been a simple, stolen moment became a powerful symbol. Richard Devereux's face, frozen in a mixture of surprise and humiliation, appeared at the same time, making him the embodiment of punished arrogance in the full light of day. Internet users, touched by Maya's dignity and talent, but also by the businessman's fall, massively shared the video, commenting, applauding, and expressing indignation at Richard's haughty attitude. Inside the restaurant, the sudden wave of attention was a breath of fresh air. Staff gathered around the screens, marveling at the unexpected recognition their colleague had received. Calls and reservations poured in from all sides, with some loyal customers even promising to return specifically to hear Maya perform, now perceived as a true artist. The local media quickly picked up the slack. Reporters, journalists, and columnists came to interview Maya, fascinated by this story that blended injustice, courage, and redemption. Her life, until then discreet and steeped in the routine of serving food, was transformed into a real opportunity. She was discovered in a new light, no longer just as a waitress, but as a talented, strong, and inspiring woman. For his part, Richard Devereux suffered a brutal setback. His reputation as a powerful and respected man was seriously damaged. Criticism poured forth in newspaper columns, on forums, and even among his business circles. Several of his partners, anxious to preserve their image, distanced themselves, refusing to associate with a man now perceived as arrogant and out of touch. But Maya remained true to herself. More than ever, she embodied this simple and essential truth. One should never underestimate the strength, talent, and dignity of a person, regardless of their apparent place in society. That evening, she had broken down many barriers and opened a new path for herself and for those who, like her, are just waiting for someone to reach out to them. A few months had passed since that night that had turned Maya's life upside down. She was no longer just the attentive waitress at the Celestial. The video of her performance had opened doors that, until then, she had not even dared to dream of crossing. Her talent, long hidden under the veil of prejudice and social invisibility, now shone in the spotlight. Thanks to the support of several patrons touched by her story, she had obtained a scholarship to a prestigious music school, renowned for training the most promising artists. Every morning, Maya walked through the doors of this establishment with the same determination that had guided her until then, but also with a newfound confidence, the fruit of the recognition she had finally received. Her world had changed, but she hadn't forgotten where she came from. The lessons learned in the upscale restaurant, the challenges overcome, and the disdainful looks remained etched in her, making her a complete artist, capable of conveying the soul of her journey in every note. As for Richard Devereux, his fall had been brutal. The public setback he suffered had forced him into a painful introspection. Little by little, he had come to understand that true power is not measured by wealth or status, but by the respect shown to others, by the ability to listen and learn. This change, though slow and difficult, marked a turning point in his life, a path toward greater humility. For Maya, the old corner piano was no longer just a piece of furniture forgotten in a corner of the restaurant. It had become a symbol, a silent confidant of her inner victories. Each time she played, it was no longer a challenge to arrogant spirits, but a celebration of her strength, her dignity, and that long-suppressed dream that she could finally live to the fullest. His story, relayed by the media and shared by those who had been affected, now inspired people far beyond the walls of the Celestial. She reminded everyone that music, in its beauty and truth, could break down the hardest barriers, and that everyone, regardless of their background, could make their voice heard.